Good afternoon, everyone. This is Naveen Nagpal, and it is my pleasure to welcome you all to Bridge to India's webinar on rooftop solar alternative grid connectivity options. Net metering policies are on the way out, and there are new connectivity options like net billing, group net metering, and virtual net metering being tried out. And today's webinar objective is going to be discussing these market developments, drivers and challenges, impact on consumer economics, and future outlook. And we have got a stellar panel today to deliberate on this topic, and it is my privilege to introduce them to you. We have with us Mr. Shantanu Sirsath, Technical Head at Growatt New Energy, Mr. Naveen Nagpal, Assistant Vice President of Renewables at BSES, Mr. Kumar Waghela, CEO in Distributed Solar at Fort Partner Energy. I welcome you all to today's discussion, and thank you so much for taking out time and joining us today. Today's discussion will be moderated by Mr. Mridul Chadda, Associate Director in Consulting from Bridge to India. I would like to thank our sponsor, Growatt New Energy. Thank you so much for supporting us and helping us bring quality content to our audience. Quickly on the format of the webinar, today's webinar will be an hour-long discussion. Start with a brief presentation by Mridul, followed by the panel discussion. We will be taking questions towards the end, so do send in your questions through the chat box located on the bottom right corner of your webinar panel. Without spending any more time, I will hand it over to Mridul. Over to you.
Thank you, Neha. I welcome all our speakers. Thank you so much for taking our time and joining us today. I also welcome our attendees. I request them to be as interactive as possible and share as many questions as you can. We will try to incorporate as many questions as time allows us. So before we move on to our panel discussion, I would just like to quickly set the stage, lay some foundation. I start with this slide, which shows capacity addition, annual capacity addition over the last few years in the rooftop solar market. As you can see, after the two lull annual capacity additions in 2020 and 21, we have seen tremendous growth in financial years 22 and 23. And this is despite the fact that there were several execution, regulation and policy related challenges that faced the market. Some of these challenges included the uncertainty with respect to ALMM mandate, then volatility in prices. So module prices, we have seen that they have been very volatile for the last several quarters, and this has directly impacted the cost and attractiveness of rooftop systems. We have also seen tremendous regulatory flux in several states, which have started restricting net metering provisions, be it through limiting the capacity size or restrictions on banking. But yet, we have seen that the annual capacity addition has grown significantly. The tremendous growth is very well visible in the residential sector, which has seen around 700 to 800 megawatt capacity addition in the last couple of years. And in 2023, we estimate that the corporate capacity addition would be 100% higher compared to that in financial year 21. So these are some of the connectivity options that consumers have. Net metering obviously remains the most favorable because it is the most beneficial, most attractive. The entire power generated, whether it is consumed by the consumer within its premises or exported to the grid and subsequently banked with the DISCOM, the savings are equivalent to the marginal tariff that the consumer pays to the DISCOM, which is around 7-8 rupees per kilowatt hour, depending on which state the consumer is in. On the extreme opposite end is the gross metering, wherein the entire generation is sent to the grid, is sold to the DISCOM, This is perhaps the least beneficial for any consumer because the tariff that the consumer gets is very low, usually uh, between 2 and 3 rupees, and it is usually linked with either APPC of the state or linked to a generic tariff that is determined by the state regulatory commission, or often a percentage of the latest uh, competitive auction rate that has been discovered in the state or at the central. Then we have behind the meter. This is strictly not a connectivity option, but remains isolated from the grid. This has gained popularity among corporate consumers, especially in some of the states where net metering has been completely withdrawn for corporate consumers, like Uttar Pradesh. And the effective savings is around 7 rupees per kilowatt hour. Because there is no banking, you cannot export or sell anything to the grid. That's why the effective savings are slightly lesser than net metering, but still it is quite attractive. The main problem in behind the meter connectivity is the sizing. A consumer must pay attention to the sizing because storage at the moment is not financially viable, and there is no way to export or back the surplus power. So the consumer must consume the entire generation. A middle path that can be explored going forward is net billing, wherein the consumer consumes as much power as it can and supplies or injects the surplus power for which it gets a nominal return, which is again linked to the generic tariff or APPC, usually 2 to 3 rupees per kilowatt. So during our panel discussion, we will explore all of these options in greater detail. Policy environment remains a major challenge in the near term, especially because right now many states are considering have issued draft regulations in line with the consumer rules that were issued by Ministry of Power, and there remains a significant scope for revision from the the state regulations, state net metering regulations. So there is a regulatory flux in the market. Several, as I mentioned earlier, several states are looking to or have already withdrawn net metering for corporate consumers. Uttar Pradesh and Tamil Nadu being the examples. And the upper limit for capacity size is has been reduced to 500 kilowatt. In few states it is 1 megawatt, and in very limited states, for example Karnataka, it is up to 2 megawatt. But there are several other challenges as well. For example, certain business models, for example OPEX, is not allowed in some of the states for net metering. That significantly reduces the overall market size. Then several states also do not allow net metering with open access due to issues related to energy accounting, which we will discuss during the panel discussion. So obviously, corporate consumers have now started looking at alternate options, BTM, behind the meter, being one of them. And we have seen states like Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan seeing substantial growth in the BTM connectivity. But again, regulators, discoms are also seeking or have already started levying grid charges like CSS or AS for certain business models for behind the meter systems as well. So all in all, in the near term, there is substantial regulatory flux for the market. These are some of the key discussion points that we will cover in our panel discussion. So overall policy landscape, we will deep dive into the regulatory challenges that consumers and the overall market is facing, the impact on consumers. So in the face of these changing market realities, how consumers, different types of consumers are looking at rooftop solar as an option to increase their RE procurement, and what are the market opportunities that would be available for all the stakeholders in the market. And finally, we'll also touch upon some of the technicalities related to BTM systems and some other variations of net metering, for example, group net metering, virtual net metering. So without any further delay, I will start with the panel discussion. I'll open the floor for opening remarks. Naveen, probably we can start with you. If you could share your experience, how net metering and other connectivity options that are available in Delhi have flourished over the last few years, and in terms of the new connections that are being applied for, what is the split between net metering, behind the meter, and any other connectivity options that we have in Delhi?
Yeah. Thanks, Midul, and let me thank Wish to India also for inviting me in this webinar. So, as far as your query about the different connectivity options, when we talk about net metering or new models, say group net metering or virtual net metering. So, let me just take you slightly back to 2014 when Delhi notified the net metering regulation. So I would quickly touch upon few of the important points in the net metering regulations in Delhi. Like in your presentation, also you mentioned few of the states have limited net metering up to 500 kilowatt or 1 megawatt, and you mentioned Karnataka is allowing up to 2 megawatt. But in Delhi, there is no upper limit of solar capacity for the net metering as on today. So consumers are free to install any capacity, subject to the technical constraints in the system, of course. But as far as regulation is concerned, there is no limit, the upper ceiling limit for the net metering. And over to this, I would say I believe Delhi would be the only state where solar beyond sanction load is also allowed. Like most of the states have capped the solar capacities either up to the sanction load or 80% of the sanction load. But Delhi is the only state, in my knowledge, which allows solar beyond sanction load also. So this also opens a great avenue for the consumers to opt for solar. And over to this, the important feature is the banking facility. Like Delhi allows the surplus generation because solar capacities are allowed beyond sanction load, so there has to be some surplus generation, and that surplus generation gets carried forward on month-to-month basis to the consumer account. And at the financial year end, consumer gets paid for that surplus at the rate of average power purchase cost. So these are few of the unique features of Delhi net metering regulations, which are quite consumer friendly, I would say. And over to this, in 2019, under these regulations, DRC also notified group net metering and virtual net metering guidelines. So when I say group net metering means a single consumer having multiple premises in our license area can put a plant at one location and get the benefit of that generation across multiple premises of his own. So that is group net metering. Where virtual net metering is where multiple consumers are coming together and they are putting up a single plant at one of the locations. So we can say like community solar. So that is virtual net metering, but only constraint is virtual net metering is limited to a specific set of consumers. Say virtual net metering is limited for domestic and your government buildings and other institutions run or managed by non-profit organizations. Whereas group net metering is open to all consumers. So that is group and virtual net metering. So if we see the share, like number of applications or capacity installed till date, so I would say over 12%, roughly 12 to 13% of the installed capacity is under GNM and DNM, and balance is under net metering. I have not specifically given any number for the behind the meter storage, behind the meter plants connected with our grid. The reason being there is no regulatory mandate to such consumers who are putting plant for their own consumption to report such capacities to the DISCOM. So there is no regulatory mandate as on today. So we do not have any actual numbers with us, but yes, I have, like, if I say we have installed 120 megawatt of rooftop solar. So over to, in addition to this 120 megawatt in BRPL, I would say around 50 megawatt would be the solar capacity, which would be behind the meter, which consumers have put for their own consumption, or probably consumers have added further capacities on their plants, which they have applied initially for net metering. If, for example, consumer had applied net metering for 10 kilowatts, and maybe after 2 years he has added another 5 kilowatts, but that is not reported to the DISCOM. So there are such plants also. So if we estimate by some informal means, so we can say easily 50 megawatt would be the capacity over 120 megawatt, which would be there as behind the meter. So that is my take on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Naveen. Very interesting point that you mentioned that not all states recognize behind the meter systems, and we'll discuss this in more detail. Jay, I will come to you now. In addition to your opening remarks, I would like to understand how the consumers are looking at the various connectivity options once they have achieved or met the maximum allowed net metering limit in their respective states.
Sure. So good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to the panelists, and thank you so much, BTF, for inviting Fourth Partner for this webinar. So Mridul, as a consumer, obviously the preference is to have net metering. We have been working across 25 states. Wherever net metering option is available, that is their first preference. Many customers, in fact, even if they have a little bit of more of roof space or ground space, they prefer to restrict the solar capacity on site if they are able to, meet the regulatory guidelines. Like for example, in Maharashtra, 1 megawatt AC side. So if a consumer has a space for about 1.8 megawatts or 1.9 megawatts, he would still say you can do it up to 1.4 on the DC side and forego that additional capacity, but avail the net metering, because we all know the factories generally, industries work for 6 days in a week. At least they have a mandatory 1 day off. So they don't want to lose that 1 day energy, which is like, 52 weeks out of 365. So roughly the offtake drops down to about 85%. So that is a 15% energy loss for them. And hence they would prefer to have a net metering, which is like a safety net available to them. However, as you rightly said, there are states like UP, Tamil Nadu who have historically not allowed net meter, but now recently they have started net billing. This is the second best option. At least instead of paying, getting no benefit for the units generated during non-working hours for the industry, they are able to pump it into the grid and get a credit at least at the APPC rate, which is roughly 3 rupees. So the loss they make is considerably lower. So if the tariff they are paying to a developer like us is roughly around 4.5 rupees, they will at least get back 3 rupees. So their net loss, reduces by at least 66%. So this is, and obviously, the next bit of states are where they are making the life difficult for consumers to avail this benefit, which is like, you have Gujarat, you have got, Madhya Pradesh, who are adding charges, or, they are adding charges which is over and above what benefit. So the difference in our grid tariff, variable grid tariff, and the solar tariff, the savings is getting shrunk because they have to share a bit of that pie to the discounts. So, so these are the 3 states we categorize. So when we go and talk to the customer, the stage 1 obviously is the electricity bill analysis to kind of figure out what is the best solution for them, and it is very state specific because in certain states open access is available. Regulatory framework is such that there won't be any open access, so they're left with nothing but on site. Say for example Haryana, to take just a state to discuss it out. So there on-site is the only option. Then then we evaluate what exactly is the roof space or the ground space available versus the net metering regulations, and we give it to the customer to make the choice. If they are able to go, say, beyond a certain percentage of, say, net metering allowance, say in Haryana it is only 500 kilowatt AC site, but they have a space of about 2 megawatts. So even if they are making that loss of 15% energy during the week ends, or say a Sunday or a one holiday day in a week, they are still able to make up more savings by having installing a larger capacity. So this is what is the methodology we follow when we go and update the customer. Yeah.
Thank you, Jay. If you could just give us very ballpark figures about the split between the different connectivity options. Say 100 megawatt is being installed by a company in a year, for example. So what would be the split across the different options?
So again, Mridul, I don't think so. There is a trend which we have plotted. But to be very honest, I feel net metering options are mostly preferred. So I would say 60-70% of the cases opt for net metering, whereas there are very few large on-site projects which happen. Typically, the average on-site projects is roughly around 1.2 megawatts. Okay, not beyond that. So there are very, I would say, handful numbers which are like to the extent of 3 to 5 megawatts on-site installation, which are very large factories. They have that kind of roof also available, and therefore they are ready to give away the net metering.
Shantanu, I'll come to you now. In terms of the technology that is required for rooftop systems, is there any difference when a consumer chooses from option A, B, C, or D? Just want your take regarding that, in addition to your opening remarks.
Yes, thank you. I hope I am audible. Yes, so first of all, thank you to Bridge to India for this wonderful event. And coming to your question, Vidulji. So when we are talking about all these options regarding behind the meter, net metering or net billing, basically you will see grid is involved in all these activities. So whenever Growatt is getting involved in these particular projects, the only option available right now are the options of on-grid inverters, which are available. Maybe for residential, the ratings may be different. For a C&I, if you are going, the ratings will be different. Or for utility, the ratings will be different. But yes, the inverter bifurcation is not done depending on the different situations or the different prospects that the end customer is going for. So the inverters will remain the same. Yes. Now, for example, for net metering, the normal directly the inverter can be synchronized with the grid, and the excess power can be fed back. But when we are talking about behind the meter, so in these particular scenarios, we need to see that we are not able to export any excessive power back to the grid. So in such cases, we need to take care that proper accessories are available, which will prevent for excess energy going back to the grid. Or in other sense, they can control the output of the inverters depending on the various load conditions. So for that, we require master units, or we call it as a master communication units, which are continuously monitoring the load requirements, and depending on that, they are giving the feedback to the inverter in order to curtail its power as per the load demands. So, but if you see in all the three aspects which Mr. Naveen ji and Mr. Waghela ji has discussed, the system or the inverter, it is going to remain the same. Or the overall plant scenario also, if we consider, there are not going to be much differences if we consider it for all the three different segments.
Okay, thank you, Shantanu. Naveen, my question is to you now. So before we discuss the alternative options, connectivity options, I think it would be great to have an understanding the issues with net metering. So we have seen several states disallowing net metering with open access. You can have either of the two, but not both. If you could explain what are the key challenges that a discom faces if a consumer has both of these options.
Difficult question, but I would say yes, there are certain challenges in providing open access along with the net metering. The first important challenge is the regulatory provision itself, because all discoms are the regulated entity. So unless our regulation allows that, we cannot allow consumers to avail both the benefits simultaneously. And as far as I understand, these benefits which we provide to the consumer through net metering or net billing, these benefits ultimately get socialized to a bigger chunk of consumers who are not installing solar in a way. So these benefits are getting socialized among all consumers of a particular discount. So probably this could be one of the reasons regulator wants to give one sort of benefit to one consumer rather than giving all benefits to a particular consumer. That could be one regulatory aspect. And the other aspect could be in terms of the billing complexities. Like for an open access consumer is supposed to provide a day-ahead schedule, how much power they would procure through an open access source in 96 time blocks. Basically, for every 15-minute time block, he has to give a schedule for the procurement. And at the month end, that schedule is being taken from the dispatch center, and then based on that schedule and the energy recorded in our meters, that too also schedule wise, 15-minute block wise. Then based on these two documents, system generates an automated bill for the open access consumers, like how much energy in which time block is being consumed by the consumer through open access power, and on the other side, how much energy is being consumed by the distribution company. And over to this, if we integrate another layer of the net metering, which should record, like, first point is how much generation occurred in each time block. Then out of that generation, how much generation consumer has self-consumed and how much generation he has exported to our grid. So there are certain complexities in the billing system, though technically it is possible to modify billing systems to handle all these things. But there are certain improvements, certain amendments, certain logic modifications required in the automated billing systems to handle all these intricacies and complexities. And over to this, there should be a regulatory mandate to carry out these all these. Like I said, probably regulators do not want to give all the benefits to a given set of consumers. That could be one of the important reasons for like not allowing open access along with the net metering. That is my take.
So, thank you so much, Naveen, for explaining this in great detail. Jay, I would like to understand from you. Now, we have seen there is significant increase in corporate sustainability measures and and targets being set by corporates to increase their RE procurement. Now, open access plus net metering is not being allowed. So, what are you seeing from a consumer's point of view? How are they dealing with open access plus the alternate options? Open access is obviously much more beneficial because the RE penetration potential that can be achieved is much higher compared to any rooftop system. Now, if open access plus PTM is considered, the sizing of behind the meter systems is very essential. As you mentioned, most of the factories work 6 days a week. What happens? What are the consumers doing on the 7th day? How are they dealing with the surplus power? Or there is no surplus power at all. They are considering that while sizing up the system.
Yeah. So basically, Mridul, I think okay, let's go states also. Like if you see, Maharashtra was the first state who actually uh, didn't allow open access and net metering to go together. Okay, their logic initially was obviously open access was just developing when they came up with the distribution open access regulations about 2016, I feel, and net metering also had started about 2014 during that time. So obviously the discoms were not ready, as Naveenji rightly said. You have to have these softwares designed in such a way that they are exactly able to recognize on the consumption side as well as generation side and map it at a 15-minute level so that the accurate billing is done to the consumers. But if you recently read the amendment which they are trying to bring in the distribution open access regulations under making it aligned with the green energy open access rules formed by the Ministry of Power, they have removed now this restriction. So Maharashtra MERC, who is one of the, I would say, forefront regulators in the country, along with DRC, they have always been ahead of the curve and want to adopt the newest or latest technology and make this sector very happening. That's a very brave and a very positive move where they have said the customers who are wanting to take open access from the green sources can also simultaneously take power from behind the meter, and they can use either net metering or gross metering or whatever solution they are okay with. So that's a very positive sign, and in fact these things we feel that this will get replicated to the other states also who have not been following this. Now there's a benefit to the discoms also, I would say, because as you rightly mentioned, the corporates have ESG mandates. There are RPO mandates for discoms also, and there are many discoms in the country who are not meeting their RPO numbers. Now, this could be one good way of meeting their RPO numbers, because the additional energy whichever goes to the grid will be taken away by the discoms and can be shown as a solar power procurement by them while they are filing it to the regulator. So in that way, this can actually help both sides. There will be no restrictive kind of a rule for the consumers. They can utilize their to the extent possible roof and the net metering allowance in that state. And if there is any additional energy being generated on site, it will be pumped into the grid. At the end of the month, say it's a monthly banking system, and I think over the entire country we will move to a monthly banking. Very few states currently allow annual banking, but once we move to a monthly banking, at the end of the month, anything extra energy will be taken away by the discom, and they may not pay the consumer anything. And that is absolutely fair also. The whole idea is that the regulation should not encourage oversizing just for earning potential for the customer. It should be the size should be such that they are able to meet their energy requirements rather than making profit out of it. And I feel like this trend will increase. So there are states where we are operating, like Tamil Nadu, where we have got on-site, off-site both option. There is no such restricting factor. So customers are now fully aware, especially the corporate customers who have enough roof space, to give them a sizable rooftop capacity. They first go for rooftop because that is the cheapest source of energy available right on the grid and on their roof, and they are able to consume it below. And then the balance they try and get source it from an open access solution. Yeah.
Right. Regarding sizing, Shantanu, I will like you to pitch in. As we discussed earlier, BTM requires that no power is injected into the grid. I want to understand from a technical point of view, is the mechanism that restricts the injection of power into the grid, is that inbuilt within the inverters, or is that a separate mechanism or separate device that consumers must install in their systems?
Yes. So talking on the technical front, So basically, when we are talking about the inverters, or basically if you say the on-grid inverters that we are using for net metering or any solar plant application, for on-grid application I'm talking about. So basically, whenever these inverters try to synchronize with the grid, two main parameters are required. One is the voltage and the second is the frequency. So depending on these two parameters, the inverter is internally generating its own voltage and frequency. Generating its own in the sense, for example, if you're talking the grid voltage is of 400 volts and the frequency is of 50 hertz for a three-phase system. So whenever the inverter is checking or synchronizing with these particular parameters, so in order to be a source of energy, as we all know that energy flows from a higher potential to lower potential. So in this particular scenario, every time the inverter needs to generate a voltage which is little bit higher than that of your grid voltage. So all these software algorithms or the PLCC loops that we call it as are all inbuilt in the inverter itself. It is basically a combination of hardware as well as which sees to it that whenever the inverter is getting synced with the grid, it always transfers the power from your inverter towards your load or then towards your grid. So all these mechanism is inbuilt in the inverter itself, because nowadays if you see, all the inverters have becoming very intelligent day by day. So all the grid connectivity parameters, it needs to monitor all the errors regarding the AC and the DC side, it also needs to monitor. So all these mechanism along with the synchronization with the grid is a inbuilt and a major important design criteria for any on-grid inverter. So there is no requirement of going for any, what we can say, external device other than the inverter to inject this power back to the grid. But yes, simultaneously, if you are saying if we want to stop any excess power from entering to the grid, then in that particular scenario, definitely we will require some external devices. Other than that, if only injection of power is there, then in that particular scenario, no external equipment is required for inverters or for the whole solar power plant. Inverter is sufficient to cope up with that.
Staying with behind the meter systems, Jay, I would like to understand what kind of challenges you and the consumers are facing in terms of on-ground implementation, especially in states where BTM is not recognized by the regulations.
Sure. So right at the beginning, I think you rightly said, if it's completely behind the meter, that means none of the net metering options or net billing, gross metering options are there. Sizing plays a very important role. And I think the key is when you're sizing the plant, the key is to understand real-time demand from the customer, which is in kW terms and not kWh, because most of the plants get over designed in case of BTM when either the provider, which is from the solar side, or the consumer is not able to differentiate between a kW and a kWh, and they typically take consumption, which is kWh, and then divide by yield to figure out that I can put a 800 kilowatt system in my premise and there is enough space also. And as after the installation, when the plants start running, because generation from a solar power plant is in a parabolic shape, 11 to 2 is the maximum generation, and maybe at that time the customer end consumption is not the same, because customer has their own pattern of consumption. And if it's like a lunch time, which is runs from 1 to 2, the consumption drops, and at that time we have to back down our generation through our electronics and getting the feedback that the power will flow otherwise into the grid. There's a reverse power relay which kinds of brings down the inverters to 50-60%, and all these inverters are smart, so it is done digitally. But then end of the month, when we as a developer go and bill them deemed generation, that time is the problem. The customer says that why am I being billed for some units which I didn't consume? And therefore this argument starts about the size was oversized, etc., etc. We build, we assume the entire saving for X units, but now only 80% of that I am able to use because the plant got oversized. So this is the challenge, and therefore we are very upfront when we discuss this with the customer, that in case in your state these options of net billing, net metering is not available, then we will have to go to BTM solution, and therefore there is some amount of deemed generation likely to happen based on your consumption pattern. The second issue is the state regulation. So there are certain states which are silent in their regulations, where they are not, they don't want the customers to come upfront and get their plant registered with them, because they are not offering net metering. So they feel that it's fine that even if the customer can on its own deploy. But what happens is when the policy changes, now there's a new policy which comes in, which has introduced certain charges for even the behind the meter, and then they say that the plants which were executed before this policy are all illegal. They start harassing the customers with giving certain amount of notices that you have been using this electricity from your solar plant illegally, which is not correct, right? Because the regulations were silent, and there was at least there should be some kind of information or intimation at least to the DISCOM that we have implemented X megawatts of on-site plant, so that the DISCOM is aware. It is not like they are also caught aware, and consumer is typically caught red-handed in that kind of situation. So we prefer to tell the customers that even if the regulations are not specifying it, it's better to put an intimation letter from our end that we are going ahead with installation of this much kilowatt. Kindly, this is for your records. So that any point of time, if there is any change in the regulations and they get a notice, they are at least able to come up with that letter saying that at least our side we have done the intimation part.
You raised a very valid point. At least retrospective levy of charges or any retrospective punitive action should not be done with respect to consumers, which only discourages them to take the greener path. Naveen, I want to understand from you some of the benefits that the Delhi government is offering as part of its recently issued the new solar policy. I believe now Delhi is the only one, the only state that is offering some kind of subsidies for corporate consumers.
Yes, Delhi solar policy, like draft solar policy was announced in December 22, but we are yet to get the final solar policy from government side, and we are expecting policies expected to be launched in next month. And the key benefits for the commercial segment, like you mentioned, is one, they are bringing a hybrid RESCO model, or we can call it utility anchored RESCO model. Because as on today, if we see, there are consumers who are interested in getting the plant installation under OPEX mode. These could be cooperative societies as well as some corporate clients. But the interest from the installer sides are missing, primarily due to lack of payment security. Because they are not very sure whether they would get their dues for the energy generated from solar plants after 1 year or 2 years of operation. So that is the one challenge which installers generally face. So to remove that challenge, solar policy is encouraging to bring out a hybrid RESCO model where DISCOM would be a party with the consumer and the installer or developer. So there could be a tripartite agreement among these three stakeholders, which are DISCOM, consumer, and RESCO developer. And DISCOM would, in a way, collect the charges for solar energy also in their electricity bill from the consumer and pass it on those charges to the developer. So maybe with certain amount of facilitation charges they will have. So that is the one important change that solar policy talks about, which will bring more thrust on rooftop solar installations under OPEX mode in residential societies as well as in commercial space. The other important point is the reintroduction of generation-based incentives. So in this policy, government is again announcing generation-based incentives not only for residential consumers, but they are giving GBI for commercial and industrial consumers also for the first 200 megawatt installation. So that is also another important lever for commercial consumers to go for solar. And the third important point I would say would be another business model of peer-to-peer trading, wherein government also asking us to bring a technology platform where consumers are allowed, where prosumers and consumers are allowed to transfer their surplus energy to a blockchain technology platform under a peer-to-peer transaction scheme. So that P2P transactions would definitely help prosumers to sell off their surplus energies directly to the consumers at a mutually decided rate between both of them, rather than waiting for the year end to get the payment for surplus energies at the rate of APP. So these three important levers I see are there in the policy, which would give more trust for solar adoption.
Naveen, staying with Delhi, Delhi is one of the very few states that offer group and virtual net metering. Now, earlier this year, we saw one of the oil PSUs, oil marketing companies, announcing a 9 megawatt project under what I presume would be group net metering within Delhi. Now, group net metering, as you would agree, is very beneficial for the consumer with multiple connections within the same DISCOM. But we haven't seen much progress happening on this front. Could you share any insights into it? Why there is a lack of increase in group net metering capacities, and how that can be overcome?
So let me just first clarify on the point you mentioned 9 megawatts that companies plan. So initially I said there is no limit for solar capacity under net metering. However, there is a limit for solar installations under group and virtual net metering. That limit is 5 megawatts.
Right.
5 megawatt is the limit under GNM. So 9 megawatt might not be the right information. Or
so 9 megawatt was split into two separate projects, which were individually within the 5 megawatt.
Probably we can explore that, like what is the exact capacity. Right. Anyways, the and second point, there is progress under group net metering. The point you said there is less progress. Recently, we installed or we commissioned the largest plant in our license area of 3.2 megawatt DC5, 2.285 under a group net metering connection in this Q1 only. That was for the CPRL, not for the restaurant, the McDonald's outlet. So we have got the plant installed at farmland at the outskirts in our area, and they are getting the benefits across their multiple outlets. So that is one. And likewise, we have another 2 megawatt kind of 3-4 more systems. Then we have lot many SDMC school buildings where solar plants have been put under group net metering, and the energy, surplus energy is being used for the street lighting, for setting of the street light consumption. So we have roughly 12 megawatt of plants on already executed, already commissioned under group net metering. And in addition to that, we have roughly around 33 megawatt of applications to various developers for various set of consumers under group net metering arrangement. But the real challenge for lesser takeoff is because these are the big size plants which are coming up at the outskirts in our license area, where the network evacuation is one of the constraints. Our evacuation is one of the constraints because of the limited network, because these are the far-fetched areas at the outskirts near Haryana border, and they are very less loads. So we have generally two feeders in a village to provide that load. And on those two feeders under N-1 contingency criteria, we cannot evacuate power from say 4 plants of 5 megawatt each. So we cannot evacuate 20 megawatt of power from 2 11 kV feeders. So that is one of the bottlenecks we have recently faced. And based on that bottleneck, we have requested from the developers also, like the pool of developers who are bringing the plants in those areas, to kindly allocate a land to us so that a pooling station itself can be created in that particular area where all these agrovoltaic plants are coming in, and we can create a pooling station at the higher voltage level so that losses to transfer that power from those remote areas to the load centers are reduced, and it is easy to maintain those networks also at least. But otherwise, consumers and installers are interested. We are receiving many applications for group net metering. But the issue is all these applications are coming under remote locations when we talk about the large ground mounted plants, say 4 megawatt, 5 megawatt. Otherwise, we are getting few applications from the residential consumers also who are owning say 3 floors in a building and they are putting a single plant. Likewise, we are receiving many small applications. So group net metering is really known to the consumers in Delhi, and people are really working to get the connections on a group net.
Okay, okay, understood. Uh, Jay, I'll come to you. Naveen just mentioned that they are receiving applications from consumers that are living uh, in a particular building. So multiple connections within one building, which would be virtual net metering. On the corporate side, uh, I would like to know your experience with respect to corporate consumers operating from leased offices who do not have access to roofs, or even those corporate consumers which have very old structures which may not be suitable for installation of rooftop systems. Uh, what is your experience with respect to these consumers looking to procure our through rooftop systems? How are they approaching this problem?
Sure, sure. So yeah, so couple of case studies I can tell you is, for example, there is a retailer, big box retailer, where typically they have got a lease tenure, like 5 years or 7 years. They will take a particular space and then they will set up the entire retail box inside. The structure would be built by some developer, right? A real estate construction company, and they will own it, and they will only give the lease rights for using the space inside and not the roof. So when we started, we faced this difficulty. So we came up with an idea of having a tripartite agreement, tripartite PPA, wherein we roped in the real estate developer also, and we kind of enumerated certain his obligations, where he was giving his roof for installation free of cost for the remaining part, the PPA term, etc. And also, there was some kind of sharing of the savings. So for example, if the customer was able to share 3 rupees, he was ready to share, say, 1 rupee to the real estate developer for allowing him the roof access rights. So this kind of innovative ideas we were able to bring in. Now the CNI customers have become very aware of this. So whenever they are actually signing up for such lease, they are asking for roof right to use the roof now only, in the beginning, in the agreement itself. So therefore they don't have to do because otherwise it's an arm twisting, right? So because they know they cannot install solar without giving the roof access. This is one. Second is in case of a mall, when there are multiple tenants and the roof is a common roof. Here what happens is, obviously, if the one of the big retailers who is responsible for bringing in all the walk-ins, now he can negotiate, he has a negotiating power with the mall owner, and then there is a kind of a tripartite agreement again, because as a developer I cannot sign a PPA with a customer if the meter is not in his name. because I'm not a distribution licensee or a trading licensee. I'm just a generator. So as far as Electricity Act rules goes, I cannot do that. But then I can supply power to the meter, and obviously that meter is being used for consumption of the particular occupier. So like that, we have tried to kind of address that, and I think this is a good solution. Going forward, I think even in the malls, we have seen more and more the consumers are pushing their mall owners to transfer the meter in their name till the time the lease is available, so that they can directly access either open access power or get the top installer to do that and avail green energy power. So all the industry is moving in such a way that nothing should stop them from accessing the cheapest and the greenest source of power. Yeah.
Very interesting, Jay. Just 5 minutes to go. I'll quickly move on to some of the queries that have been shared by the attendees.
Yeah.
Shantanu, this is a technical one, so probably you can take this up. The query is whether for behind the meter systems, whether it is useful to use grid forming inverters rather than grid following inverters. How even is that possible? And if it is possible, how would that benefit the consumers or the grid or the discom?
Yes, so basically, I think that grid forming inverters, what we are trying to say is to build a microgrid system. So whenever we are going for any microgrid system, then basically it consists of it will come with a BSES solution, that is storage solution will be required for that. But when we are talking about behind the meter, definitely this can be utilized. But in this particular scenario, depending on the load condition, we also need to see how much of storage power or the storage batteries will be required for executing such type of power plant. Because till date, the rates that we are seeing for batteries are on a very much higher side. But if you are only considering a normal solar power plant, then definitely the costing for that is pretty much less, and all the regulations are available when you are going for an on-grid solar power plant. But that same case is not available right now with storage solution. One more option is that you can integrate BESS with your on-grid power plant. So that is one of the what we can say option in which the excess energy, whichever they are exporting back to the grid, that can be used to store the charge in the batteries, and during the non-sunny hours, the same stored power from the batteries can be used to run the local load. So in that way, we can integrate BESS solution. But to completely create one microgrid solution, yes, it is feasible. It has been done, but again, there are cost implications for that, which the end customer should be ready to accept it.
Right, right. We are almost completely out of time, so I'll ask all the speakers to give their closing remarks. Jay, I will start with you. If you could just shed some light on where do you see the next growth spurt coming from in terms of the alternate connectivity options. Net metering is obviously now restricted to 500 or maximum 500 kilowatt or maximum 1 megawatt. So the next growth growth defining option, where do you see that in the market?
I think net billing option is a better option, wherein the discoms also don't have to bleed. Okay, for the extra units which come to their grid, it gets banked and get utilized by the consumer again. They are paying only the, I would say, the average power purchase cost for that particular units. Okay, in the bill adjustment, right? So they are not out of pocket in that way. That helps the installation to become right size. There is no undersizing that required for that particular consumer. The other one, which I think group net metering is also a great option. The feasibility obviously will depend on, like for example, Naveen ji explained the case study of McDonald's, which is a very great example. Now, finding a particular spot for installing a larger plant and utilizing through group net metering option could also expand this market a lot, because there are many such franchisee or retailers who have got multiple options, like multiple, I would say, shops or locations pan in that state that can be utilized across. So that's a very innovative way of breaking the shackles, I would say. These are the two options which I would say consumers can look for now.
Naveen, to you, closing remarks, and can we expect net billing to be introduced in Delhi anytime soon?
That is not my call. That is the regulator's decision. But of course, MOP, Rights of Consumers Rules mentions that each regulator should take that rules into cognizance. So let's see when can we expect not only net billing, gross metering, and net metering, all three combinations. But I would like to add one point about the gross metering here. We have seen now many states have announced power subsidy schemes where 200 units, 300 units, 400 units are free for the consumers. So on one side, we are trying to motivate the consumers for solar installation. On the other side, because of these schemes, consumers are not really very motivated to invest money in the installation of solar plants. So for those consumers, I would definitely say, see, gross metering is one solution which can also motivate those consumers to put solar plants. So gross metering should always be an option for such consumers, so that those small size consumers we do not miss in the entire chain. So those are quite big in numbers, and we should not miss those numbers. So we should definitely look for gross metering policy for such consumers, so that they can avail the benefit of subsidy schemes from the government also, and on the other side they can install solar and get benefit through a feed-in tariff from those plants. And other than that, many states have limitations of sanction load when we talk about the solar installation. So under gross metering, that limitation also goes off, because irrespective of the sanction load, under gross metering, entire power is to be spread to the DISCOM network. So there is no need to limit that solar capacity up to the sanction. So these 2 points, I think regulators might take in cognizance and bring out the regulation. That is my closing remarks.
Thank you, Naveen. Shantanu, your closing remarks?
Yes, so basically grid connectivity is the only option, but how different options in that we are going to have will play a very major role. And if I talk about from the inverter side, definitely with the ongoing developments in this particular field, the new set of inverters that are already available in the market and they will be hitting India very much soon are the battery ready inverters. So the same on-grid inverters, to them you can connect the batteries also, and can be utilized, those stored power can be utilized during the evening hours or the night hours. So definitely grid connection or grid connectivity is going to be required, but this new set of innovations in the inverter field will definitely boost, because it will not completely, but uh, uh, more dependency on the grid which is there, it will completely eliminate. So there will be very less dependency on the grid, so that whatever the energy you are being producing with the help of your solar energy, that we would be utilizing, and if required can be exported back to the grid also. So battery ready inverters or the BSS solutions is going to be a future in coming years, definitely.
Right. Thank you so much, all of you. Very enlightening conversation that we had over the last 1 hour. I'll quickly summarize some key points. So I think everyone would agree that India has a massive untapped potential for rooftop solar power systems, and giving consumers as many options as possible would be the best approach to increase RE penetration and utilizing this untapped potential. The uh, main issue, the main hurdle that remains is, at least in the near term, remains the regulatory flux. So state governments, state commissions would do would it would be very good if these agencies could explicitly mention all the options within their regulations so that there is complete clarity on the developer side, on the DISCOM side, as well as the consumer side. Also, probably tinkering with some of these options, be it behind the meter, gross metering, or net billing, so that every stakeholder gets some benefit out of it, would be the best option. Thank you very much to all of the speakers and the attendees as well. I'll hand it over to Neha.
Thank you, Mridul, and thank you so much, panelists, for sharing your insights. This was a very engaging and interesting discussion. Thank you so much for taking out time and joining us today. I would like to thank our sponsor, Growatt New Energy, for supporting today's webinar. And finally, I want to thank our audience who were part of this webinar. We will be sharing recording of today's webinar in your on your registered email account, and it will also be available on our website. We will meet you soon, very soon in our next webinar. Until then, it is goodbye from all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you, everyone.